Welcome back, everyone. Bridges Live, episode 6. I am excited to be here with some close friends who are going to share some awesome insights with us today. If you are new to this webinar series, these are a compendium to the Bridges series that I produced earlier this year, a 12-part series on bridging the gap between marketing and finance. And what we're doing is we're taking each of those episodes and we're pairing them with a live interview where we're actually going to interact with a founder, a CEO, a CMO, a CFO around the topics themselves. So we can sort of bring them to life. Sometimes speaking over a PowerPoint is helpful and useful, but also it's good to get to actually interact with people around some of the nuance that exists around these topics. So we are excited to dive in today. We are going to be going through episode 6. I'm going to drop that in the chat for you. If you haven't watched yet, I would encourage you to bookmark that, go back, and of course, like, subscribe, and comment. But the topic today is one that is something I've been a longstanding advocate for, and that is that the marketing team should be responsible for the financial forecast of an e-commerce business. And that's because ultimately they are responsible for the levers and actions that generate revenue. They build the calendar that drives the moments, that leads to the ads and the emails, and ultimately produces the outcomes. And therefore, I believe they have the best view of the information. So, of course, that doesn't happen in isolation. It's always going to be a collaborative exercise, but marketing-led forecasting is a passionate topic of mine. And today we get to discuss a specific example where that is exactly what we're engaging in with a partner of ours. And it's a well-known e-commerce business that many of you have seen. He's on Twitter riling people up as usual. He's been on his antics the last week. The man is feeling himself. But let's meet our guest today, starting off with you, Stephen Borrelli, CEO of Cuts. Tell us a little bit about the business and who you are.
Yeah, my name is Stephen Borrelli. As Taylor mentioned, I do have some Twitter figures time to time. Specifically with Taylor, we like to jar back and forth in a playful debate sometimes. E-commerce business, our tagline is we operate to inspire those to compete and win in the sport of business. And we make men's and women's apparel to do that to their best of their ability. Been in the e-com game for about 7 years now. We've sold over 300 mil of lifetime revenue, and bootstrapped, haven't raised any outside money. And we've pretty much made every mistake under the sun, and we've also done a lot well. So specifically in this area, I think the more and more I get into the business, the less and less I realize I know. So I still feel like we have a long way to go to building a great business.
Awesome. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. And his counterpart joining us today is Chris Wilkerson, CFO of Cuts. Chris, who are you? Give us a little bit of your story.
Yeah, Chris Wilkerson. I'm the new face here. I've only been here for about 6 months now. Great group of guys, great business, great brand. Very excited to be a part of it. I come from the apparel space. I was at a company called Ethica for about 11 years prior. Went through the CPA route prior to that. Now I'm here.
Awesome. Love it. My kids are still on. The Ethica game is still pumping, man. My kids came home the other day and we're still like, Dad, I gotta get some Ethica underwear. Apparently it's just like becoming cool, the kids again. So good to have you, man.
That's
Thanks
cool.
for joining. Okay, we're gonna go deep with these two in just a second. But as you know, I always do, I start these off with a demo from our friends at Finaloop, okay? Which, by the way, this is the coolest app. They build these things for me on a thing called Nav Addict, which is just a way to build like these UI UX demos for each of these episodes to show off some cool feature. So Finaloop makes these series possible. They're an incredible partner of mine. Huge fans of what Leo and the team are building over there. I think it's the best accounting platform in e-commerce right now. They are an incredibly smart and dialed in group of people. And I want to show you one of the things today that is a critical part of how I think e-commerce operators should function. I'm a big believer that this first tab in your browser every day should be your 13-week cash flow forecast, and beginning to orient yourself around how the cash in your business is growing or shrinking will transform the way that you look at your business. And so I want to show you a little bit about how they can help bring that to life for you. Right now, Finaloop is primarily focused on historical accuracy and real-time accuracy. So that everything is backwards looking. But for me, they often will build these features to bring to life some of the things I care about. If you go into Finaloop, you're going to see 4-quarter accounting as a now default feature inside of their platform. And I also want to show you this today. If you go into this section, you'll see at the home screen, you'll often see a cash flow trend over time. So this is obviously one of the 3 key financial documents is going to be your cash flow statement. They show you this trend right off the get. You can jump into this and see it in a number of different ways. We can dive into a deeper cash flow statement in real time that gives you a sort of rolled up view for the year. You can break this down and see it by month. And then this is the part that's really cool that actually enables you to very quickly get to a 13-week cash flow forecast if you don't yet have one. So in here, you'll see all your reconciliations of outflows and inflows, which is the general components of a cash flow statement, your cash on hand, all of your existing bank balances, liabilities, etc. But if you hit this button right here, it's actually going to lead to an export. And you can export, you'll see beta new here. This is the cool feature I'm excited to show off. And if you click this, it's actually going to drop into a Google Drive folder that's going to look like this. Let me show you here. Where did this go? Oops. All right, hold on. Where did we go? Export. There we go. Sync now. Okay. So what this is going to do is it's actually going to create an immediate Google Sheets export of your P&L, of your cash flow statement, and is going to set up a template pre-built with your accurate information for a 13-week cash flow forecast. So if you wanted to start with an easy foundation to get a cash flow, 13-week cash flow statement, which is really just a forward-looking view of all your cash inflows and outflows, they're going to set up all of your existing vendors that you're paying, some of the historical view of the last 2 weeks. So you'll see sort of the previous 2 weeks here. You're going to see a list of all your outflow vendors, which they have already set up for you. And then boom, you can just go in and begin to fill out your expectations of future revenue. Hopefully you're pulling that from a forecast, which we're going to talk about today, as well as then when you plan to make all your payments to existing vendors. And so this will instantly allow you to have a pretty solid view of the net inflow and outflow of your cash and the growth of your balances over time. So super easy way to take a historical looking document and populate it into a template from my friends at Finaloop. We're very grateful for their continued support of this series and helping to educate all of us on the best financial practice in the world. So there you go. That is my quick sponsor plug. But now back to what you all came here for, the interview with these two gents. So Stephen, I'm going to kick it with you. Give us a little bit. You mentioned you've been around for 7 years. You guys have, that means you've been up the COVID boom, probably through some sort of struggle on the other side of it. And you stand now, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue sold. How has your forecasting process evolved over time through the course of those 7 years?
So back in the early days, it was just whatever money we could borrow is how much inventory we would get. So starting in year one, me and our old CFO, we took out a 20-0 APR for 12 months, and that was how we financed it. So we just ordered as much. And we did that predominantly through the first couple of years. And we were fortunate enough to have a very simple business at a time, one fabric and and really just one style, which is t-shirts. And so the business was very simple, and it didn't matter if we ordered too much or too little because we could always like reforecast the next month because it was just one SKU. But then when the business became more complex with men's, women's outerwear, that same methodology was kind of the almost the death of us in one ways, because, you know, if we kind of held that same methodology towards a bunch of different products, it wasn't going to work. So I think coming out of 21, we you know, obviously like most brands, we didn't have enough inventory, and it was sort of like a, hey, what do we think we can do? We didn't really have a returning customer model. We didn't understand how much we could spend at a certain CAC. And that really hurt us over that period in time, just by kind of eyeballing it. Now, moving forward, we really have with CTC, we have a much better forecasting model where you look at the returning customers that we have and we forecast those out, which is we've gotten really good in hitting that number. And then if we look at, you know, the next 3 and 6 months, we build a bunch of initiatives. We say, what are those initiatives worth to us? And then that builds how much money we think we can spend at a certain CAD. And, you know, what's great about these e-commerce businesses is once you get in a good flow, it can be pretty simple, but it does take a lot of discipline to get it set up the right way. And that's where Cuts didn't have the discipline around understanding all the variables, like making sure your OpEx was under control, making sure you truly knew where your spend was and how efficient it could be. And, you know, in 21, we developed a lot of bad habits. It was, you know, we spent $7 million on influencer, sight unseen, and ordered a bunch of products, and everything just was working, you know. And then in 22, that same methodology got us in a really tough spot. So I think it just takes a lot of discipline around doing it to be great.
So there's something interesting that, like, in the early days, there's sort of this beautiful constraint that actually makes the process simple, which is we can't afford to buy that much inventory. So our forecast is actually very intimately connected to this constraint of how much stuff we have. And then as you grow, it sometimes sort of gets further and further disassociated from that. which is actually where a bunch of risk gets introduced. There's something about that. I love that you started the story there, which is like there's this beautiful simplicity of like, I have this many units, that equals this many sales. That's what I'm going to go do. And it's like, there's no other way. There's not extra inventory. You don't have leftover of this SKU in excess of that SKU and this aged inventory and that aged inventory. It's simple and clear and obvious. But obviously, like, because now you have men's and women's, you have tops, bottoms, outerwear. You guys have a much broader set. So, Chris, that's the world you walk into. You don't get to participate in the simple view. You walk into the much more complex business, but you came from apparel, so you knew what you were getting yourself into. So talk a little bit about how you think about as a CFO approaching forecasting in a very complex environment like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're nailing it with these conversations where you really rely on the marketing team because to Steven's point, we're trying to forecast the demand. So we're increasing the inventory buys. So to me, the first thing I want to do is ask the marketing team, like, what's the market for this product? How much market do you think we can reach? What are the efficiencies with that marketing spend and how we're going to acquire that customer? So it's a very symbiotic relationship between finance and marketing when you're going to grow additional products and start demand planning for these new products, because you want to know how much marketing dollars you're going to put behind it and what those strategies are going to be. So then you can assess the risk of those strategies from the finance perspective.
Yeah. And it's funny because one of the things getting to know you guys, and one of the things I learned about forecasting is it's a very human activity, meaning that we all bring our personal disposition, the way we view the world generally shows up. And you guys are an interesting pair because Steven, I experience you as this like immense optimist, and you have this like visionary drive as a CEO, and you tend towards seeing the possibility of everything. How do you think about bringing that personality trait to your forecasting process? And what do you think the strengths and weaknesses of it are?
Yeah. With Chris and our old CFO, I think we had a good yin and yang as well, where I was always the optimist and the CFO role was the pessimistic role. But where that got unbalanced was like the Ampla and the Wayflyers of the world in 21, when you see a, crazy growth, 150, 200% growth, and people want to give you $10 million in an afternoon with very little diligence. And then the optimism maybe goes a little too crazy. And then you find yourself with way too much inventory. And the death of a brand really is when you order too much inventory and then you overspend to sell it because you develop negative contribution margin. And it can be a really tough lesson if you survive. You got to learn. And so I think that's something that, we're still trying to get better at. But, we're an inventory, you're a cash heavy business in apparel. You're going to need a lot of cash. So those Wayflyers of the world can be great opportunities for a business. But, if you're an optimist like me, it can get you in trouble. And if you don't really have a good finance team holding you accountable to the forecast that you set, it can be bad. So you really got to be disciplined.
Yeah, there's so much about it. And I love the interactions that we have with your team because I think a CEO's job is always to press people on what they think is possible. We could do better. If we don't challenge our assumptions, then we just end up sort of moving towards the median. And nobody wants to be the median, right? We all want to be the outlier in performance. And I think a lot of times, I think you do a good job of representing that voice. But Chris, how do you think about interacting with that voice without stifling it? Like, you don't want to just be the negative person that always says no, but you also have a fiscal responsibility. So how do you think about your interactions with Steven and that responsibility that you play?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Actually, coming in and new and being that pessimist while learning, I learned a lot on how to communicate better with that process. Because at the same time, I want to be the voice in the room that says, hey, there's a lot of underlying risk here. If we don't execute properly on this could put the business in a vulnerable situation. But I also don't want to blow that light out. I don't want to crumble that ambition because, like you said, man, Steven got the signature. It's sick when he's fired up, and I love to see that and don't want to be the killer of that. But at the same time, like you said, I got a fiduciary responsibility, so I got to bring these things up. I got to be tactful with communication and just making sure I have all the information at hand, so I'm not bringing up something that actually might not be reality.
And one note on that, one thing I look at it is it kind of goes both ways. Is it's kind of like a scoreboard. If I'm 0 for 2 on the last couple big PO buys, I think we're going to lean towards more Chris and be like, hey, Steven, you haven't hit a forecast the last 2 quarters. We're gonna buy towards this downside. So I think in the early days of cuts, I always felt like we didn't order enough because we always were sold out. And now with more products, it's really important that you also understand what the product does for you too. So like as you add more products, there's way more areas for risk. So you have to be that much more careful.
I think that what you're
Yeah.
oh, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say to add on that, I think the story of the jogger is an incredible story of one of your success stories because that jogger, the product's flawless and it's amazing. And hearing the buy that went into that product and the success it had is incredible. And it just goes to show that your optimism and ambition really paid off at that time. But the business is just growing and getting more complex, right?
Yeah, we in 21, we had like a full container sitting at the. It was like in a huge line at the port. We like air freighted a 747, like 50,000 joggers. We had only sold like maybe a few of them on a Friday projects, like 300, and we were like, so it was like almost sight unseen. We ordered 50,000, and we ended up doing 10 million bucks between September and the end of the year. And one respect, it was like it gave me a lot of confidence as a founder. And I don't know if there'll be another time in history where you can make this big of a mistake. So I wouldn't, hopefully there's not another COVID again where demand could shift like that. But it gave us a lot of false hope of like, okay, the next product, the 50,000 sight unseen. We ordered cropped women's tees when we launched women's that like bigger sizes, and we still have those units now. So I think like through that lesson we learned, you have your hero SKU, which is their t-shirts, then a sweatshirt, then a jogger. Then every other SKU is going to operate completely different than maybe those top 3 SKUs. So it was sort of like beginner's luck with also just like category expansion, and it's a lot easier. And then, the second sweatshirt's going to do a lot different than the first. So understanding how to make those PO buys based on the kind of the season of the business is in is just a lesson you're going to have to learn. And as a CEO, you're going to have to get good at that.
And this is where this is. We have to acknowledge that this process is art and science. And I would love for us to be able to extrapolate data to tell you about everything that's going to happen. But there is so much that when you're introducing something novel, especially in the new product realm, it really does become gut about how much does this product meet the market in the moment. Now, there's all sorts of cool tools that you can use to try and get sense of velocity of similar SKUs from other brands and the market demand and all these things. But there still is this sense, this intuition that many times great product operators that they know, one, I have the right marketing message with the right story that's going to meet the demand in this moment and drive through it. But I still think there's this discovery phase that has to happen in that arena that is really important to acknowledge, that is super challenging to go through. Just is. It's just the reality of it. So, all right. So I want to talk a little bit about how the process has changed. So we started working together about 60 days, or about 3 months ago now, which was it was the podcast that never happened, that I showed up at Steven's office to do a podcast. He and I ended up just talking for about 3 hours, and we've been working together since. And I'd be curious, Chris, you probably were like, wait a second, who the hell is this person? Like, I get the sense that Steven occasionally will just make an impromptu decision, and we're off and running somewhere. And so all of a sudden you've got this guy and you're like, what is happening? Who is this person? What's their POV on the forecast? Like, what was your feeling when all of a sudden there was this marketing guy that showed up and wanted to provide a financial POV?
Well, maybe the fact that I was new was good for you because I didn't get to play the pessimist as much, where I was more open to somebody new. No, but you know what? That's a good question. I think I was actually excited because you came in. I was in another meeting. I remember you coming in the office and just kind of giving your quick spiel, and it was impressive to hear what you had to say and to hear what the strategy you were going to take within the ad account itself. It made sense to me, where if I went back to our previous ad buyer, I don't think I would have got any substance to the conversations. I mean, I'm not giving them a chance to rebuttal that because I didn't really have that many conversations. So I don't know if that's true, but I was highly impressed with what you had to say at first impression.
Yeah,
I think the big thing that got me excited from that initial meeting was understanding, I know this is going to sound simple, but like on a daily basis, how do you look at your business from a profitability standpoint, and like not going over or under that. And if you do, you understand the direct impact, what it could have on contribution margin. And it's something we had in place before, but it wasn't as like regimented, where like we wasn't as disciplined. And we could easily go over, hey, it's fine. We have such good retention. It'll be fine. But we didn't realize the impact it could have. And so my light bulb went off, and I'm like, oh wow, this is much easier than we're making it. And so I think we way overcomplicated how we thought about it, and to like make it a little bit more simple again, just made it easier. And from there, we were
Yeah.
able to get up and then,
That's exactly right.
uh,
My sense was like you guys were already tracking daily contribution margin. Like it existed in a spreadsheet, but you had so many tools and so many different things that it was just like kind of getting back to like, hey, let's get everybody in the room. Let's look at a smaller set of things and let's figure out where we're going and sort of cut through a little bit of the noise, which I think is a lot of time. You sort of accrue that over time. You accrue a bunch of legacy processes and decisions and systems over the course of 7 years of doing business that sometimes you need an outsider to just come in and kind of just clear the cobwebs out a little bit. Get rid of that stuff. You have the stuff. It's right here. Let's just look at that one every day. And I think sometimes it's an easier thing to do than someone who's been in it for so long. I know that's the true for my business too.
yeah, for sure. And it was a breath of fresh air. And I think, yeah, I think it was funny. I was watching Taylor's videos about kind of this stuff, and I remember talking to Chris. Hey, I think we should do it this way, but it wasn't until you came in office that I could kind of connect the videos from that we're watching now to like actually executing against it. And then it was like once that meeting came, I think I made the adjustments and I count like before you left that day. Remember we were already, and then it was like off to the races from there, and then
Yeah.
we had a pretty good run since.
What I love is that, so if I think about one of the main things about this idea of unifying the process of marketing and finance and giving all the team members clarity of it, like what I love seeing now is that we still sort of work in collaboration with your team, right? Like, and when I see Nathan or Brennan or any of the other guys, like they now feel like they know exactly what they need to do and they're seeing the business with clarity and they're super smart guys. And so it's like they know exactly how their actions are relating to the goals that we have. And so right now it's funny. It's even a lot of them pulling you back on the reins and being like, no, Steven, like we're trying to get to this contribution goal. We're not quite there yet. Hold on. And so it's all, the team is clear of where they're at and it makes their process of managing the media channels better, like clearer towards the financial goal. And I think that's the part of it that feels good is that the team, in my sense, from the marketing and finance side, we all can look at Stylus every day and go, okay, we know the goal and we know what we did yesterday and how it relates to accomplishing that thing. And it's cool to see that come to life for the team.
Um, the things I loved is the revenue over time V2
Yeah, yeah.
sheet you have it because it shows you like over the next 12 months, if we could continue this path, our cash flow in that 13-week sheet is going to be night and day because instead of, some of the cohorts that took a while to be profitable, they're going to be profitable like whether a month or two in. So it gets me excited. Just it's going to be more fun running the business. We used to run it so high risk and now it's just a little bit, the pressure's off a little bit in a way.
Yeah. So Chris, one of the things that I think early on you were even a little skeptical of is the media efficiency expectations. And I think in some ways, in fairness, you still represent some questions of like, hey, this isn't totally solved yet. We still have curiosity about this, but like, how do you think about your role in assessing media efficiency? Like that's sort of a thing that usually gets left to marketers, but it feels like you have a clear sense of what you want out of it or you're feeling about it. So how do you interact with media measurement in your mind as a role as a CFO?
Yeah, it's a good question. I keep it kind of high level. There's just a couple KPIs I look at, like AMER, for example, CAC. And it helps me to understand how much it costs to acquire a customer. And then when we have our LTV economics, it allows me to understand if this business is within what the market should be, what it should be doing within the market, or if we're exceeding that. So it's a good benchmark for me to understand it at a very high level. And then if something doesn't make sense to me, I always try to double click so I can fully understand it so I can either try to help, or sometimes when I ask the right questions, people start to find answers to their own problems that they didn't even know were there.
I love it. So one of the things that we've been talking about is like, we're talking about how do we go out next year and improve against the expectations. So you guys just kind of had a jam session talking through Q1. And one of the things that we've been trying to talk about is how do we not just try and think about our media improvement as just making a better ad, just figuring out how to make the next best ad, but actually building a more cohesive brand storytelling process. So maybe share a little bit, Stephen, about how, as you think about next year and the goals that we have together, how are you thinking about how marketing will alter the financial forecast? Like, how are you thinking about the actions you need to take to produce better returns where we break the model, where the data becomes wrong because we've done something better than we've done before?
Yeah, I think in terms of volume, I think we're up there with the best brands that can put out the most content. And, we got to a point where like, man, like it's not a volume issue where we're at now. It's actually just a bigger brand idea issue that's going to allow us to grow. And so the way we're looking at Q1 is the product, the marketing, and the people that we work with all has to be in unity. And and there's my favorite book is War on Incrementality by Frank Slootman. And what I love about that, he's not looking for step changes. He's saying, all right, let's do something completely different to shock the system, to not just be 1 or 2% better, but like 30, 40% better. So when we look at Q1, that's really what we're doing, is saying, how do we just like fresh aisles do and do something that is completely different, that still aligns with the business, but it's not going to be just a blue ad with the new background of yellow text. That's not going to get us there. It's going to be an integration with the influencer and his charity and a product drop that hits a marketing moment that meets, the seasonal appropriateness of, Q1. And so I think having that story is going to be better. And I think the DTC world at large really suffered from this increased spend that you can just grow. And it was a little bit easy for a while. And Cuts was definitely a beneficiary of that. And now like real marketing's coming back. And that gets Cuts excited because we think we're actually almost better at that than like just like putting something on sale at 30% off, which is what a lot of brands do to show growth. We actually have a real brand and we're excited to like do real brand stuff. And the way Meta's going, I think it's also kind of going more that way of how you actually grow. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it.
Yeah. And I think that's actually your sweet spot individually is that you're going to thrive there versus the like iterative creative changes to media buying tactics. Like I think you're going to be so much more equipped to do that. And this is such a perfect illustration of why I think marketing has to lead the forecast, is because a finance leader will never get to what you're describing. Like there's no data extrapolation that I could do in building a financial model that would make January way better than any other year before it. That's not how data modeling works, right? Like the only way to introduce that as a possibility or an expectation in your financial forecast is for a marketing leader to say, we have a plan to come up with a thing that's going to disproportionately affect the business. And these are the goals and why I think it's going to get there. And that to me is the critical step to building a great 2025 plan. Is that we call it 4 peaks theory or financial planning, is to say, what are the moments that are actually going to break the model? What is going to disproportionately affect the business? And how do we plan that? And I recognize that the error bars on that kind of work might be wider. It probably has higher upside and higher downside than if I were to just extrapolate out last month to next month. But that's okay. You need some initiatives like that represent an unlock to the upside around trying new things that do create step function change to the business. And I think that's where, to me, this whole exercise begins in the marketing calendar. It really does. But Chris, what I'm describing feels like volatility. It probably feels like fear. It feels like uncertainty. So how do you balance creating certainty against a moment that's never happened before that we want to go spend a bunch of marketing dollars into?
I would honestly say I think I'm an anomaly because I come from a brand that's all we did at Epica. We didn't spend $1 on paid media. We tested out for a little bit, a part of a year, but everything we did were in these moments. And it's dang near impossible to say, hey, we're going to go sign this dude or this ambassador and do, a collaboration product and we're going to activate him this way. So we think we're going to get this return. It's really hard to measure that. But we just knew we had a formula that we knew would work in creating these brand moments that would elevate the brand and drive more organic traffic. Hard to measure, risky, yeah, but it was a formula that worked. And Steven and the team prior to me being here, I could see in the brand itself, they did a really good job at that. So when these ideas are presented to me, I feel like as long as it's explained in a way that makes sense and there's a good go-to-market strategy with some of these initiatives or how we're going to get this content to the marketplace, I somewhat understand it. And I think it just comes from my prior experience. I think it's a really hard challenge for a lot of finance professionals because it's more of like a qualitative thing that you can't put a number to.
Yeah, totally. Do you think about boundaries on it? Like, do you think about, okay, we have this much cash available to put at risk, knowing that like the exact return will be hard to model? Like, how do you think about providing some contextual boundary to an initiative like that?
Yeah, I think it makes it the most sense to get to a base level where the business is making money off of doing what it knows how to do best. For example, if we use Cuts, we know how to spend on Meta. We know how to create ads. We know how to create cool content. We know how to bring new products to market. That's our baseline. Okay, well, how much are we going to make with our baseline when it comes to EBITDA or net profit? Any excess, I would say that we would sit as an executive and decide how we're going to allocate it and where this kid erodes some profits in some months, but what the return is as well. That is my best assessment of how I go about it. So you're not just putting a bunch of money into these brand initiatives and you're hemorrhaging money month over month, and then you're stuck in a bad situation if a lot of these initiatives didn't work.
And one note on that, I think when you're thinking about the other initiatives, it can't come at the expense, and we've definitely done this before, at the thing that the main thing, keep the main thing for us, it's our crew curve, which is our hero SKU. It's been our hero SKU. It's what we launched with. We got to have colors for that. And one of the things out of in 22, we had so many colors. We're like, oh, we don't need that many colors. Let's do black, white, and a staples platform. Then we saw our LTV on each cohort go down by like $20. We're like, why did that happen? It's because it's easier to get someone to buy the thing that they bought already in a different color than a whole new product. And so for us, that was just one example of us. We said, oh, shiny new object. Let's go do that at the expense of having colors. And so now it's like, okay, we got to do the baseline right. And then we can add in these other initiatives. And we've learned so much over the years.
I love that. I think I try and use it like a personal finance metaphor here, which is like, if I was going to provide you some financial advice of how to invest your money, I'd say like, hey, we need 60% in an index fund. We need a baseline security of the thing we know has a safe, guaranteed return. That's your core SKU. That's not going to grow 400% next year, but you're going to get 8 to 15% on that core SKU. Boom. Let's take a bulk of our inventory purchase and buy the foundation. Now, with this remaining 40%, we can increase the risk and we can increase the upside. We want to create some volatility that maybe, we're going to get into some real estate, and then maybe there's some Bitcoin, and then maybe there's some like seed stage investing that maybe it's Uber and it's probably zero, right? Like, and so as you think about the mix, I think about this a lot where I encourage brands sometimes to have a savings account for marketing initiatives. That's like, take some excess profit and actually put it into a kitty, like move it into a separate account if you have to, and say, I get to deploy these dollars with an unknown return and an unexpected, non-guaranteed return, because that's what these brand moments are. They're not going to deliver this short-term ROI, 7-day click, blah, 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 blah. And if you try and measure them that way, you're going to always suffocate those opportunities. You'll never do them. But if you can take some dollars and you go, okay, I've saved this up, that I can go invest it in a thing that has high upside, low present obvious yield, then you get to make those choices. But you got to plan for it financially as well. So
one more note on that too, try to do things that compound each other. So what I mean by that is we used to do things like podcast and TV buys, but they didn't necessarily compound each other. We instead of going about doing like influencer whitelisting ads that also created word of mouth, but we could also use that content on Meta. It was a better form of using dollars to have success rather than something new that would have its own funnel that would be, you'd have to spend a lot of money to kind of get the base. And that was another way we lowered our CAC. Think of ecosystems that can work together when you add in kind of like another marketing initiative.
That's great. I love that. All right, lightning round. We got a few minutes left here. These are the questions that I ask everybody when they come into this. So I'm going to go to both of you, okay? So at CTC, I said successful forecasting is plus or minus 10% to target. How would you define it? What would be a successful forecast in your mind?
Chris, you stand it.
I'm kind of with you there. I think it depends on the organization too, and it depends on where it's at. I think 10% is a good threshold for cuts at its current state. So I would agree with you here.
Okay. Steven wants beat it by 50. That's his basic.
Hey, up 10%. I'll go with that one.
Yeah. It's funny. There are definitely different personalities where it's like minus anything is never the right answer. And so it's just, you gotta think about the presentation to each person relative to that. But, all right, what's your home screen right now? If you pulled up your dashboard, what's tab 1? What do you look at first every day?
I'm looking at contribution margin on that list now. It's simplified the business in a way that's so much more fun to run. In my head, I could do the mental math and say, okay, this is where we're at. And like by the 10th day of the month, I'm like, okay, we're going to hit our contribution goal. Our EBITDA is going to be this. I can go to bed and sleep much easier at night. And so, because I know what our fixed costs are. I know what what we're pacing towards a contribution margin. So I can quickly do the math, and that's where I look at it. We used to have, no joke, like 30 sheets we looked at. Now I just look at one.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah,
Chris?
For me now it is the stat list email that I get every morning. You guys are the first emails in my inbox. Prior to that, I was looking at previous days' revenue and cash coming in. And then it would evolve into going into my financial model. That's stat list. Good
Love it.
stuff.
Okay, quick side note. This is actually because I think this is a relevant debate for you guys. So right now, if I'm not going to say numbers, but I'm going to give a general scenario that the Cuts is dealing with, which is fairly common. Like your returning customer revenues overperforming. Okay, so it's like better than we thought. Returning customers a little softer than our new customers a little softer than we thought. So there's sort of two schools of thought here. One is that you take the excess contribution off of the existing customers and you go drive new customer volume. So we go and we press up the volume and we allow that negative new customer and excess returning to sort of neutralize to target. But we have more new customers. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought is you never capitulate to the standard of efficiency on new customer acquisition, and we should be driving to that. Where do you both sit on that debate?
This is where me and Chris will definitely position a little bit. I tend to like, we want to continue to grow the business, and the more customers we get now means the more returning customers we'll get tomorrow. So, and I believe in our product plan moving forward. So, I think, now I have a much more measured approach to this before because I understand it on a deep level. So I can understand it. We can push it to this level because we'll still be profitable in a shorter period of time. So I'm not like reckless that I think I once was. But it's definitely, reinvested into new customer acquisition.
Yeah, and clearly we know on the polar opposite, but it's actually a balancing act I try to play because I don't want to get caught up in the short-term cash, right? Like I know that Steven's thinking of the future and he's got a vision for the future, so he knows that the LTV to CAC for these customers is much more significant if we acquire them at the right periods with the new product plan in the following 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, it's hard.
What
I
do
don't
you
think.
think, Claire?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think there's the right answer. What I'm afraid of is that if you create a revenue expectation that requires you to drive negative contribution to customer acquisition, that the comps just become harder and harder to solve till eventually the next tranche of new customer acquisition deteriorates that existing customer revenue too much. And so I love the constraint of forcing myself to solve the right problem, which is solving the right problem. The harder problem is the one where I have to go make the ads better, where I have to actually go fix it. Now, for short periods, like if we trusted ourselves not to get totally caught up in that, it's probably okay. But I've watched that slow boil of the frog where suddenly it's -$1 and then it's -$2 and then it's -$6 and then it's -$9. And that can happen if you just aren't really conscious of it. Because it is a hard problem to go solve the opposite.
Does it make more sense leading up to Black Friday, or does it matter when it comes out, like before the 4 peaks? Does it say, okay, the 3 weeks before,
Yeah.
we're okay if you want to build them
Yeah,
out?
that's fair. I think that is the question is at what window do you want to measure this? It's the right question. And because there is an argument that we could be suffocating the Black Friday realization by being too stringent today. And you want to be conscious of that for sure. The danger is though that you get to Black Friday and you don't hold the constraint then either to realize the excess margin that you just spent. And so you actually spend all the way up on Black Friday too. And now that whole theory kind of goes out the window. And so you just have to be thoughtful. And as long as you're acting intentionally, understanding the implications, which we're in so much dialogue about it that I think we are, like we're making those choices every day. And I think we're looking at it right now and going, okay, let's see what happens if we tighten up first. Let's try this action, this allocation, whatever. And then I think we can keep adjusting. But yeah, if there was a moment, and why I'm less worried about it today is because I know we do have that moment coming. If this was June 4th, I'd probably be more concerned about saying we got to get the ad account into efficiency now. But I know that we do have that moment coming, and I feel good about where we're at overall.
Yeah, Taylor, I'm curious to ask you what you think on this because I'm a big proponent of holding the efficiencies, but trying to get scale out of the efficiencies. And I think that those do come from those brand moments. I think if you put some focus on that, that's where you can get that additional scale.
Yeah. And that's why I think we're pushing, right? Is like, there's always these two rhythms happening. There's like plan January, go build the brand moment in January. Cause the problem is those are hard to create Friday, it's really hard to create those fast. So there's like the short-term rhythm, which is we need to hit tomorrow's AMER target. And it's like, what are the behaviors and actions that go into that? And then how do we beat January's AMER target? Those are very different functions. And I think you need almost marketing departments that are functioning on two different cycles, right? And usually different groups of people that are sort of working through that. Because otherwise you always end up on the hamster wheel of tomorrow. And that's not good either. Like you'll never get to these brand moments otherwise.
We've been there before, the hamster wheel of tomorrow versus like, we always, or we say the best marketing isn't tomorrow. Like, there's only so much you can fit tomorrow. It's usually a discount, but in 4 months from now, or 6 months from now, or a year from now, you can really plan something special.
Exactly. And that's where, like, to me, that's where we're most useful as a partner is like, let us worry about tomorrow. You go do the thing I can't do, which is like, I can't design your product, build the brand moment, create your marketing calendar. Like, that's what usually internal teams are uniquely equipped to do. Like, we can wrestle the ad account tomorrow, and like living in that space is sometimes better for us as a partner versus letting you create space, Stephen, to go, okay, I know tomorrow's contribution margin is going to be taken care of. I can go put my brain onto January and do the founder visionary thing and get to a place where creating something that we can't create for you, And I think that's the best version of the partnership in a lot of cases.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, a couple more. Does your executive team have shared financial incentives, or how do you guys structure like leadership incentives?
Uh, yeah, we're quarterly bonuses based on financial performance. Yes.
And that's shared across marketing and finance, like same goals together?
Yep. It's a top line. It's like 50% top line, 50% bottom line.
Cool. Do you think Cut's current media budget is too high, too low, or just right? Kind of a follow-up to our question.
Chris, you go.
I would like it to be higher, but I think it's just right for the efficiencies that we're seeing right now. But it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. How do we get more spend at the same efficiency?
Well, I think exactly we are 50% above spend for the month. So I guess that's good. So I'll say it's right where it needs to be.
Yeah, Steven always wants more. He's dying to spend some money on app loving. If anybody's played with that yet, Steven's
And
dying to get into mobile games. This guy's been playing Candy Crush all day, just dying to see a Cuts ad.
That kind of.
All right, last one, guys. For anybody listening, what would you offer brands to help them build a better financial plan for 2025?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think first and foremost, have a financial model, keep it simple. People try to get way too complex when you can just keep it simple, high level, some trends that are already in the business to use. I really like the product. This isn't a plug for you, so this is an organic plug. That product that you introed in the beginning, I mean, that's great for e-commerce businesses that don't have a whole lot of sophistication, especially when it comes to a 13-week forecast model too, because then you can see out and how much cash you need, and if you need to go out and get some additional capital for any reason. So yeah, that's my recommendation.
Mine would be for founders specifically. Like just the one big lesson I had is, I had such a go mindset in the early days, and and it was confirmed by it because we had such success that not that pride comes before the fall. It's not that I didn't care about finance, but the relationship I had with our old CFO is, hey, if I'm gonna have money in the bank, I'm gonna press it as hard as I can, and I think that can work to a degree. But then it creates a lack of accountability for me as the founder if I'm like, hey, that's on you. So now I think through the last couple of years of kind of getting some hard lessons that I had to kind of slowly work through. And then, if you order too much inventory, it really hurts the next POs because you can't order it and it stifles innovation. So it's kind of like, you learn the most when the lessons are the hardest. That's sort of what happened to us. But to avoid those, I think the founder, if you can just really understand what your OpEx is, like the full quarters accounting that Taylor says, is magic if you truly understand it. Don't just listen to it, apply it to your business and have it help you make decisions, because then you'll just be more fun running the business. Like we've been really tight sometimes, and I hate that feeling. And then there's times when we have a little bit more juice, and I think having that ability to not only think about cash when things are really hurting is something you want to avoid. So to do that, just be proactive about you, the founder, being responsible also for the financial diligence and performance.
I love that, man. I'm like you, where it's not my background, and for many years I had this story about myself as a founder that like, oh, I'm a marketing guy. I'm not a finance and operations guy. And like what I was doing is I was actually like hiding from my responsibility. Like as the CEO, you are in charge of the money, whether you feel like it or not. That is your job. And so by accepting that, I think I realized like, oh, this isn't rocket science. I can actually understand this stuff. It's not it's not like I'm trying to learn to send a rocket to the moon here. This is basic principles. They're financial terms. In marketing, we have more jargon than anybody. If I can understand attribution, I can understand accounting, you
Yeah.
know? So it's like, it's actually not that bad. So leaning into it, I would completely agree. Just force yourself. And that's why I like to put the 13-week cash flow forecast first in your tab, understand it and make it grow. If you do that, your business will never fail. If you can make that one tab grow, your business will stay afloat. So love it, gents. Appreciate you both coming in, sharing honestly, and with humility and insight, and appreciate you both. Thanks everybody for tuning in to another episode of Bridges Live.